Flashes of crimson and cobalt streaked across my driveway, splashing against the glossy paint of my car as I stood watching. 17-year-old Ryan Mercer was being cuffed behind his back, shouting at the officers with a voice trembling between outrage and disbelief. He kept yelling about his rights, swearing his mother would have them fired before sunrise. I stayed composed beside my immaculate sun-yellow Vortex GT, speaking calmly to the lead officer as I walked him through the sequence of events. All around, neighbors spilled from their doorways like moths chasing light, clustering along curbs and peeking through curtains. Their murmurs filled the air, fragments of shock that Linda Mercer, our iron-fisted homeowners association president, had raised a son capable of such reckless defiance. 3 months earlier, I'd moved into Maple Crest, heights carrying nothing but excitement and the dream machine I'd worked years to afford. The gated community had seemed like paradise. Manicured hedges, spotless sidewalks, and the quiet promise of orderly suburban peace. My software consultancy had finally taken off, and with that success came both the house and the car I'd always wanted. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd arrived. Those first few weeks drifted by smoothly as I settled into routine, often catching myself admiring the way my Vortex gleamed in the morning sun, parked perfectly in the circular drive of my corner lot home. Then one Tuesday, Linda Mercer appeared at my door, and everything shifted. She stood there in a cream blazer and heels that clicked like punctuation marks, clutching a leather portfolio that reeked of authority. Linda was in her late 40s, her blonde hair sculpted to perfection, her smile just tight enough to suggest it was more performance than warmth. Introducing herself as the HOA president, she welcomed me to the neighborhood with the enthusiasm of a loan officer reviewing late payments. Her eyes kept darting toward my car, and I could almost hear the quiet whir of judgment as her mind began to calculate what rules it might possibly violate. She made a few remarks about how the car seemed a bit flashy for such a quiet neighborhood, gently suggesting that maybe I should keep it in the garage to preserve the community's visual harmony. What began as Linda's polite hints soon turned into a full-blown crusade against my car. Within 2 weeks, I received my first official warning, a neatly printed notice on HOA stationery citing some obscure clause about vehicles that might disrupt the neighborhood's tranquil atmosphere. Her signature sprawled across the bottom like a personal challenge. When I looked up the rule myself, I realized it was so vaguely worded it could technically apply to anything that wasn't beige, gray, or invisible. I decided to ignore the warning, assuming she'd lose interest and find another target. I was wrong. Linda doubled her efforts, firing off increasingly stern letters about supposed noise complaints, reckless acceleration, and fears that my car might draw the wrong kind of attention to our peaceful streets. Each message came with a higher fine, starting at $50, then $100, then $200. But what really caught my eye wasn't the paperwork. It was her son, Ryan. He started showing up during every confrontation, lingering just close enough to listen as his mother lectured me about community, integrity, and property values. The kid was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the smug self-assurance of someone who'd never heard the word no. Everything came to a head on a sweltering Thursday afternoon in late August. I was in my driveway, hose in hand, washing down the Vortex when Ryan appeared, this time without his mother. He strutted up the path like he owned it, chest out, chin high, every step radiating entitlement. Without so much as a greeting, he demanded that I hand over the keys to my car, claiming that since his mother ran the association, she technically owned everything inside the gates, including my vehicle. The sheer arrogance of it left me silent for a moment. Then, when words finally returned, I couldn't help it. I laughed. I laughed outright at the ridiculousness of his demand. Trying to keep a straight face, I told Ryan that being HOA president didn't grant his mother ownership over other people's property, and that his grasp of both real estate law and authority was wildly misguided. His face turned crimson as my laughter continued. He started shouting, spitting out threats about how I'd regret disrespecting his family. Then he spun around and stomped toward his house, but halfway down the walkway, he turned back and yelled that I had no idea what his mother could do to someone who crossed her. That night, sometime around 2:30 in the morning, strange noises jolted me awake. Living alone had made me hyper-alert to every creak and thud, so I grabbed my phone and pulled up my security camera feed. One of the smarter precautions I'd taken after Linda's constant harassment began. What I saw froze me. Ryan was crouched beside my vortex, clutching what looked like a crowbar and a screwdriver, trying to pry open the driver's side door. His movements were sloppy but determined, and I could already see fresh scratches marring the glossy paint near the handle. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher about the break-in in progress. The operator assured me that units were on their way and told me to stay inside and keep watching through the camera. On the screen, Ryan grew more and more, frustrated as the car's security system outsmarted him at every turn. He kept glancing toward his house as if hoping for reinforcements. But the Mercer home stayed dark. It was clear he'd decided to handle this little act of revenge on his own. Then, in the distance, sirens began to wail, faint at first, then rising fast. Ryan must have heard them too because he suddenly looked around, panicked. Instead of running, though, he doubled down, hammering at the door in a frenzy. The first patrol car swung around the corner, its spotlight slicing through the night. There he was, and standing right beside my vortex, tools in hand, caught in the act of attempted grand theft auto. The officer's command echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "Step away from the vehicle. Drop the tools." What happened next was so predictable it was almost absurd. As the officers advanced, hands on their holsters, Ryan started shouting about who he was, bragging about how his mother ran the entire neighborhood. He insisted he was only reclaiming his family's property and warned the officers they'd face serious consequences for meddling in HOA affairs. The lead officer, a seasoned veteran with gray at his temples and the weary calm of someone who'd seen every flavor of teenage arrogance, didn't flinch. Within minutes, Ryan was in cuffs while I handed over the security footage as evidence. That's when Linda Mercer appeared, storming down her walkway in a robe and slippers, shouting before she'd even reached the street. She accused the officers of harassment, screamed about false arrests, and demanded they let her son go immediately. But when she realized just how damning the footage was, her fury shifted into a desperate performance. She started pointing at me, claiming that I had somehow set up her innocent son, that I'd deliberately flaunted my expensive car in plain view, practically tempting him into wrongdoing. The officers endured her tirade with polite restraint before explaining, in measured tones, that attempted vehicle theft was a felony, no matter how creative her excuses were. Within 48 hours, the charges were official: attempted grand theft auto, criminal mischief, and property destruction. The damage to my vortex, deep scratches and a dented handle, would cost over $3,000 to repair, enough to classify the incident as a felony offense. Linda, refusing to back down, hired an expensive attorney and started threatening me with countersuits for defamation and psychological distress. But the security footage was crystal clear. Her son had been caught red-handed, tools and all. No amount of spin could erase that. Then the real fallout began. Neighbors started stepping forward, sharing their own stories. Tales of Linda's intimidation tactics, her petty fines, her son's escalating aggression around the neighborhood. The HOA board, facing growing outrage, called an emergency meeting to deal with the chaos. And for the first time since I'd moved into Maple Crest Heights, Linda Mercer found herself facing a vote of no confidence from the very people she'd ruled over for years. The local news caught wind of the story. The HOA president whose son tried to steal a resident's luxury sports car, and within days, Linda Mercer's carefully polished reputation began to unravel. Her employer scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, issuing a curt statement about evaluating the situation. Ryan was sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention and ordered to pay full restitution for the damage he'd caused to my Vortex GT. When the judge announced the decision, Linda let out a wail that reverberated through the courtroom, her expression collapsing as she realized her son would spend the next year and a half behind bars for his entitled recklessness. The HOA board had already voted her out, 8-1, with only Linda herself casting the lone vote in her favor. a hollow gesture from someone desperate to cling to power. Neighbors who'd once lived in fear of her citations and threats now spoke openly about her corruption, detailing years of intimidation, arbitrary fines, and community bullying. A local newspaper followed up with an article titled, "Disgraced HOA President Faces Civil Suits After Son's Arrest," reporting that 3 families from Maple Crest Heights were pursuing legal action against her for harassment and abuse of authority. Her employer, a prominent downtown law firm, quietly asked for her resignation soon after, as clients began to question whether they wanted to be represented by someone whose family had become the centerpiece of a tabloid scandal. The image Linda had so carefully constructed, the pristine queen of suburban order, disintegrated overnight, leaving behind nothing but legal debt and public humiliation. As the bailiff led Ryan away in shackles, Linda turned toward me one last time. Her eyes burned with the kind of venom reserved for people who have never faced real accountability, people who cannot comprehend a world where their power no longer shields them. But her glare, once terrifying, meant nothing now. All her threats, her manipulations, her reign over mailbox colors and lawn measurements reduced to ashes in the face of genuine consequence.